So if we're marketing to shoppers, we have to create consumption. It has to be about driving consumption. Which means that any process that you consider, any answer to the question, how do I make shopper marketing work, must start with the idea of consumption. Must start with the idea of consumption. Must start with the consumer. So for years, well, about 2 years, my friend Mike and I struggled to come up with an overarching process that would integrate this idea into the work of marketing teams and sales teams so that they could work better with retailers. And we came up with 176 different processes, all integrated together. Fantastic. Amazing flowchart. You could put it onto 3 pieces of paper and roll it down a conference table and say, look at my beautiful process. And most people would say, yeah, that's great. But nobody in my organisation is going to understand that. And one guy said, over a beer, he was a very senior sales guy, global sales director for a big company, he said, yeah, but can't you just make that a 5-step process? And being British, we had a few more beers, and said a few rude words about him, and the next morning, very hungover, on a beach, we said, well, what if it was a 5-step process? Wouldn't that be so much easier? And we said, if there were a 5-step process, then the first thing that would have to happen was that we would have to articulate consumer priorities. Consumer priorities would have to be articulated in terms of who do we want to consume more? Who's not consuming the product now? Who could consume the product? Because those would be the ways within which we could grow a brand. And then we said, well, look, many consumers, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, many consumers also buy, but their behavior is different. So what would we have to do to change shopping behavior in order for the consumers to be able to use the products that we want them to use? So that was the second thing. Once we knew our consumer priorities, let's understand which shoppers we should be targeting and look at how we might change their behavior. And then we said, but the trouble is that when it comes to retail, different people behave differently in different environments. So if you want to change shopper behavior, you probably need to know where they're shopping, how they're shopping, and particularly which channels or which outlets would you prioritize. Now, if you knew these 3 things, what would happen is you'd know the gross market potential, the total growth you could get. That could be a really good input for portfolio strategy. By understanding shopper behavior, you'd start to get to a more real view of the likely addressable market, because there'll be a whole bunch of people who say, I would like to use it, but don't necessarily buy it. So you get a more clear view of addressable market. And once you then filter over which retail channels you can use, you could actually get very close to a potential growth figure for your brand that you could realize realistically. Then all you need to do is create a marketing mix that addresses the consumer priorities and the shopper behavior and the channels that you're going to prioritize, which would give you the cost that you are likely to incur. And against that cost, you could make an investment, knowing that your sales were likely to increase, and therefore you would be able to understand the return on investment. So we said, I wonder if that would work. And guess what? We implemented that in all sorts of different economies. Yeah? Sorry. So that improved dramatically. And what was really interesting was the level of retail engagement between manufacturers and retailers improved. In all cases.